The Dark Cosmos. Stay cosmic.
One small step for man.
Teddy Marsh said as he stepped out of the emissary and set his foot on the reddish soil, his voice slightly tinny in the communication device.
One giant leap for...
Teddy, we talked about this.
Peyton Maeve cut him off. She descended right behind him, stopping briefly to smack him on the head.
Ow!
Teddy groaned, despite the fact that his head was safely tucked away in the helmet of his spacesuit.
And hey, you might be the team leader, but you certainly don't write the speeches around here.
There are no speeches. I'm pretty sure Mission Control doesn't want to hear your theatrics.
The speaker was the third and final member of the team, Melissa Parker.
We are here to collect soil samples from this spectacle of a planet.
You two are real buzzkills, you know that?
Although no one could see, Peyton rolled her eyes. From within the shuttle, which looked more like a space plane than a shuttle, although people hardly called it that, Melissa opened the hatch and lowered 2 hover bikes onto the ground. Soon after, she emerged from the shuttle. She climbed onto one of the hover bikes and turned on the engine, then turned expectantly to Teddy.
I can't believe we're on the planet Mars, millions of miles away from Earth, and I'm stuck riding shotgun like a little kid.
Come on, you big baby.
Melissa chuckled.
Try not to wander too far.
Peyton said, as she took command of the second vehicle.
The trackers and the comms have a wide range, but let's not push it. We meet back here in half an hour. Got it,
Melissa said. They turned west of their location and zoomed off, leaving a trail of red dust in their wake. Peyton waited until they were almost out of sight. Then she headed north. She drove for a bit before she slowed to a halt and looked around. Tapping on her wrist, she spoke, describing the area around her. After that, she took a few pictures and then a short video. It was nothing but boring red sand and rocks for miles in every direction. But that was the job. All of a sudden, the mics crackled to life.
Hey, Peyton?
It was Teddy's voice.
Get over here. We think we found something interesting. Like really, really, really interesting. And a little bit spooky?
She glanced down at the tracker. They were not too far away.
On my way.
As the signal grew stronger, Peyton found that among the rocks and the sand, there was a giant cave. She came to a stop next to the other hover bike parked at the entrance to it. At the mouth of the cave, she found Melissa and Teddy waiting for her.
Look what we found,
Teddy said, pointing at the cave as if there was any way Peyton could have missed it.
You called me over to see a cave,
she said, trying and failing to feign interest.
Alright, first of all, it's a Mars cave.
Teddy said, waving his hands. Peyton was not impressed. Before the mission, she had studied the data collected from Mars rovers, and while she had not seen any caves, the rock formations and weather suggested their existence.
And I assume there's more on the planet. They're naturally occurring. That's how caves work. Not in this case,
Melissa said.
What? Take a closer look.
She stepped aside. Peyton approached the cave, and as she did, her eyes grew wide in understanding and awe. Her eyes followed the surprisingly flat surface of the cave ground, up to the impossibly smooth curvature of the cave ceiling and walls.
This...
She trailed off.
Yep,
Melissa said.
It's too precise. It's unlikely that it happened naturally.
Peyton knew what they were implying, that someone made this cave. Something inhuman. But she was a proper skeptic. It would take more than that to get her to even entertain the idea.
But it's possible, yes? It's not possible,
Melissa said.
But there's more.
She tapped on the side of her helmet to turn on her flashlight, then proceeded into the cave. Teddy did the same, and Peyton brought up the rear. They went some distance before Melissa turned and faced the wall, her light illuminating the direction she was looking in. And that was when Patron saw it. The cave walls were covered in drawings. First, they looked like mere geometric shapes and lines, but looking further into the cave, the drawings seemed to have some sort of pattern that Patron could not quite explain.
That definitely did not naturally occur,
Melissa said. Patron was speechless. Something both sentient and intelligent had drawn these things.
Where did the drawings end?
We don't know,
Melissa said. Patron looked at them.
What do you mean you don't know?
It was Teddy who answered.
I voted that we go further, but Melissa refused to and asked that we call you here instead, so, I guess we needed a tiebreaker?
No.
Melissa said.
What we needed was someone to talk sense into you, and that's why I called her. This is proof of alien life on this planet. We are here on a geological research mission, and this is beyond the scope of our mission. We should leave it alone and pretend we never came here. Tell him, Peyton.
There was a self-satisfied look on her face, like she had just won.
I think we should see what's further inside the cave,
Patron said. Melissa's smug smile faded.
What? Wait, no. That's not what you're supposed to say. You're supposed to say, Melissa's right. We should leave this alone.
We're on $1 billion research trip to gather rocks, Melissa.
Patron said.
This is a chance to do much more. Imagine if we brought back proof of aliens.
Clearly, you haven't been watching the same space horror movies I've been watching,
Melissa said.
This is the part where we slowly back away.
I'm sorry, Melissa, but it's, 2 against 1 here.
Teddy said. Melissa stared at Patron with a look of betrayal. Then she sighed.
Fine then. The sooner we get this over with, the better.
With Melissa reluctant, Teddy led the way forward. The cave went straight in until they found a faint orange glow, seemingly suspended in midair. As they drew closer, they found that it was a glowing rock, and it was indeed floating in midair. Except there was a pillar over which it hovered. The pillar was made out of rock, but it was covered in dust, telling them that no one had been here recently. Underneath the coating of dust, they could almost make out more markings on the pillar.
So, turns out the light at the end of the tunnel is a floating rock.
Teddy quipped. Patron smacked his head again.
Oh, come on, that was a good one.
Let's just take a picture or something and then we can leave.
Melissa said.
This place gives me the creeps.
She readied her camera, but before she could take the picture, Patron stepped in.
Oh, come on,
she said.
Hang on a second, it's all dusty. How will we read the markings?
She got on one knee and wiped the pillar clean, but as soon as she took her hand away, it lit up, glowing the same orange as the rock. Above the pillar, the orange rock was pulsating rapidly now. She backed away in a hurry.
That's not good.
The words had barely left Teddy's mouth when a shockwave from the pillar threw them off their feet, knocking them out instantly. On the 20th of July in the year 1969, America launched the first manned mission to the moon. Mars, however, took a lot longer. It was another 60 years before they put a drone on Mars. But in the summer of 2040, the first manned mission to Mars was launched. The advancement in technology had been spontaneous after years of slow progress. Not only had they been unable to design faster, more efficient and more durable rockets, but they had also discovered a more efficient source of fuel, and with that created a more sustainable fueling system that enabled the reusing of rockets, saving them billions. For the mission to Mars, NASA had picked 3 of its best and brightest, Melissa Parker, Peyton Maeve, and Teddy Marsh, to undertake the expedition. Before that, they had gained space travel experience, having been a part of the team sent to the moon. They had undergone several months of training to prepare them for their longer travel through space. Originally, Peyton Maeve had intended to pursue a career in nuclear sciences, But after a freak nuclear accident claimed the life of her mother, leaving her orphaned, she had a change of heart. Besides, there was just something hauntingly beautiful about space that called to her. Peyton awoke to a pounding headache. She opened her eyes to find herself staring at the weirdest ceiling she had ever seen. It took her a full minute to find her bearings and realize where she was. And then she remembered the pillar and the explosion. She scrambled to her feet, and only then did she notice the bodies of Melissa and Teddy lying next to her. Fearing the worst, she rushed to rouse them. Fortunately, they stirred immediately, although disoriented as she was.
What the hell happened?
Teddy muttered.
The pillar,
Peyton reminded him.
it sent out a shockwave that knocked us out.
All the way out here?
Melissa said. At first, Peyton thought she was speaking gibberish, but then she took a look around and realized that they were back at the entrance of the cave.
What the hell?
She said. 15 minutes later, the trio were back at the shuttle, seated around the table in the common room. The suits had been taken off, and they sat in their jumpsuits staring at each other, over half-empty plates of beans and pork. Peyton had always been able to read faces, and as she sat there, looking at her comrades, she had a general idea that the motivation had suffered a blow. It didn't help that for some reason, since their return from the cave, they had not been able to get in touch with Mission Control back on Earth. The communication equipment seemed to be on the fritz.
Maybe we should just wrap it up and end the mission ahead of schedule,
Melissa said.
What? No way.
Teddy countered.
We still have 3 more days of meteorology study and, more ground to cover?
I'm sure Mission Control will understand when we tell them we got freaking knocked out by God knows what, and our bodies were moved while we were unconscious. Do I need to spell it out that something might not want us here, and maybe we shouldn't push our luck?
That's enough, Melissa, Peyton said. Remember your training and calm down. Melissa sighed and leaned back in her seat. We still have a few days left and our mission isn't over yet. We'll stick to what we came here to do and stay away from that cave. It's just a few days, and then we're out of here. Her word was final, but Melissa's reluctance was still evident. Still, she said nothing more. Peyton understood her thoughts, but still, they had to think about more than themselves. This wasn't just some vacation trip they could simply call off. They had to finish the mission. The next few days were spent doing just that. And when the third and final day came around, even Teddy was relieved to be leaving. As they lifted off, leaving the red planet in the distance, Peyton could not deny the relief she felt.
I know I was all for the mission,
Teddy said, as he worked on the controls, setting the coordinates for Earth.
but I'm sick of eating food from a can.
Amen to that.
Melissa said, her mood a significant improvement now that they were leaving. In the past, the average trip from Earth to the Moon took around 3 days, but the faster emissary was capable of making the even longer journey to Mars in 2/3 of that time. By what would be the morning of the 3rd day, after they left the red planet, Earth came into view. A few hours later, they prepared to re-enter into the Earth's atmosphere. Peyton tried to engage the auto-landing, but to her horror, nothing happened. Okay, we might have a problem, she said. We're going to have to land this thing manually. Melissa and Teddy jumped into their stations and Peyton shouted out commands to them.
Something's wrong.
Melissa said.
The controls aren't working. We're not decelerating fast enough.
I think we've lost an engine?
Teddy said.
The second one is barely functioning. How is this happening?
Guys, we're going to have to eject, Peyton said. Ready the escape pods, Ted.
We're too high up.
Teddy said.
And descending way too fast.
I know, I'm working on it. Melissa, aim this thing towards water.
On it,
Melissa said. Peyton pulled down on the lever with all her might, and the shuttle began to slow down. Still, the shuttle rocked uncontrollably, jolted by the G-force as they continued to rocket towards the Earth.
Pods, now!
Teddy yelled.
Ejections in 2 minutes!
Peyton jammed the lever in place, then made her way to the pods. Teddy had already strapped in, and Melissa was climbing into the other. She slipped on her helmet, got into the third pod and secured herself in place. She closed her eyes and listened to the countdown sequence as the turbulence rattled the shuttle. Before the timer got to 0, she blacked out. Disorientation and nausea were Peyton's first reactions after her consciousness returned. Then came confusion that soon became panic as she looked ahead of her, outside the pod. The sight that lay ahead of her, through the plexiglass window, was a dry desert land, and the sand was grey. She unbuckled her seatbelt and exited the pod, but not before she reached down beside her seat and picked up her rifle. Looking around, she found nothing but barren land, sparsely dotted with dead, white-trunked trees with ring patterns and faded yellow grass. What was going on? They had entered Earth's atmosphere and were on course to return to the space station before the crash. But this was certainly not Earth. So where the hell was she? A series of taps on her gauntlet brought up a survival menu. She clicked on a button to test the air. There was a small hissing sound, and then the panel turned green with the air composition and the word breathable at the bottom. She took off her helmet and took a deep breath. The air was breathable, but it smelled wrong in a way that she could not quite describe, and it stung her nostrils. Next, she turned on her tracker and sought out Melissa's and Teddy's pods. Melissa had landed close, but Teddy was further away. She further searched for their transponder signals and found that Melissa had left her pod, but was currently standing in place. It was too far out to tell Teddy's location. Peyton fetched her survival gear and started off in Melissa's direction. The desert land soon came to an end, but what came next was surprising. It was a swamp. There were trees, so tall they grazed the skies, and everywhere vines could be found wrapped around the wide trunks. A quick glance this way and that showed her that there was no way around the swamp, and so Peyton trudged on, wading through the mud. The weight of her energy rifle in her arms was her only comfort. It was an experimental weapon, capable of blasting through solid steel. It did not take long for the flying insects to take interest in her. It was easy to swat at them, as their only target was her face. The further inward she went, the more the tree coverage blocked out the sun, until she was forced to resort to her headlamp. After a few minutes of walking, she could see a light coming from the other end, indicating the way out. Spurred on, she sped up, and in her hurry, she almost missed the hissing sound coming from around her. A sudden movement of something small and rope-like caught her eye, and she turned, swinging her arm. Her protected fist hit the creature and sent it flying into a nearby tree. There, she got a good look at it. It was a snake, except its body seemed to have no end going up into the tree. It retracted until it vanished from her sight, and as Peyton followed its movements, her eyes widened in horror. The vines overhead, they were moving, all wriggling like snakes. The realization had hardly settled in, when from overhead, the vines reared like snakes would. Fuck. In an instant, she pushed down the safety lever and opened fire. Bolts of energy streaked into the darkness, tearing through the snake vines. She jumped to the side, narrowly evading an attack going right for her head, then turned and fired at it. More snake vines descended upon her, and even from the swamp bed, they continued to gather. Peyton fired with reckless abandon, but she barely made a dent. Putting the gun aside, she quickly reached into her backpack and retrieved a small cylindrical object, just slightly longer than her hand. She pressed a button, and a long blade jutted forth, forming a machete, just in time as she swung at a cluster of snakes that had come dangerously close. The blade cleaved through them with an explosion of greenish blood. She swung again, and more heads were severed. With each snake vine she slaughtered them, she moved a step forward. On and on, until she burst out into a clearing. A last attack. They swarmed her, but she threw herself several feet away, landing hard on the grassy floor. There was a cacophonous hissing, but the vine slowly retreated. Peyton rolled over onto her back and heaved a heavy sigh of relief. "This is so not what I signed up for," she muttered. She checked the signal and found that Melissa had still not moved. When she had caught her breath, she resumed her journey. She barely made it another minute before her breaths became shallower and shallower. The more she tried to breathe in deep, the harder it was. "What the hell?" She found the answer on her gauntlet. The air composition was less than 5% oxygen, and the other components were toxic. Quickly, she fixed her helmet in place and inhaled a lungful from her tank. It took several more before she could breathe easily again. That was way too close. Melissa's signal grew stronger the further she walked out, but Peyton soon found herself unable to breathe well. And it wasn't due to the exertion, because her body did not feel fatigued. It was almost like she was running out of oxygen yet again. Curious, she stopped and inspected her gauntlet. And that was when she discovered that, for some reason, her oxygen was at 15% and rapidly decreasing.
That's not possible!
Sucking in a lungful, she reached out to detach the cylinder, and as she brought it forward, she discovered, much to her horror, that the cylinder had 2 holes in it. The holes looked like they may have been made by fangs. During the skirmish in the swamp, one of the snakes must have punctured her cylinder. Working quickly, she retrieved a welding gun from her backpack and proceeded to seal the holes. With her oxygen significantly diminished, Peyton's odds of survival were dismal. But she had one last hope, and that was Melissa. Melissa was the smartest member of the team, with an IQ of around 162. If there was even a slight chance of survival, Melissa would make it happen. Motivated, she doubled her speed and forged ahead, doing her best to slow her breathing. 3 miles later, and then some, the crash pod came into view. Peyton, unable to help herself, sprinted to the pod. It had landed well, and the hull did not appear damaged. So Melissa had landed safely. Now to find her. Her transponder signal was less than a mile away, but when she looked, Peyton saw nothing. Only the grass that came up to her knees. Where was she?
Melissa!
Peyton yelled.
Melissa, can you hear me?
A beep forced her to look at her gauntlet. She was down to 3% oxygen. She walked as fast as her legs could carry her before breaking into a run. 2%. Disregarding the consequences, Peyton ran even faster. 1%. As she brought her wrist up to her face, she tripped on something large and went down hard.
What the hell was that?
Peyton groaned. She glanced over her shoulder and froze. She had tripped over a body. A human body. Lying face down in the dirt. Dressed in a spacesuit.
Oh God!
She rushed over to kneel next to the body and turned it over. Both arms and legs were missing, and there were claw marks all over the suit. She looked like she had been mauled by a pack of wolves. The helmet was on, but there was no mistaking who it was. The name tag was right there on the chest, too. Forgetting her own predicament, Peyton sucked in a deep breath and opened the helmet. Melissa's face stared back at her, her lifeless eyes looking up into the sky. But Peyton's grief was put on hold, and in its place there was shock. It was Melissa, all right, and she was indeed dead. But somehow decay had set in so quickly that she might as well have been dead 5 days ago. Her face was bloated and melting away from her bones. Her hair was pretty much peeled away, and her eyeballs had sunk into her skull. The difficulty to breathe reminded Peyton that she had problems of her own, and if she failed to solve them, she would share a similar fate. But the solution was not far away. In fact, it was staring her in the face. Melissa was dead, but she could still help her. She turned the corpse over and detached the oxygen cylinder, then replaced hers with it. As soon as it was securely fitted, Peyton's breathing slowly returned to normal. She checked how much was left and was pleased when the panel glowed green with the number 93. Grief-stricken as she was, Peyton knew that it was only a matter of time before whatever had done Melissa in returned for seconds, and it would be the end of her if they discovered her. And so, suppressing her emotions, she pulled up Teddy's location. He was close enough that she could see him on the radar now. She could only hope that she would find him in a far better condition. When Peyton's mother died, 2 men in suits came to pick her up from school. At first, she had been hesitant to go with them, but they spoke with her teacher, and even the principal, and whatever they said must have been convincing enough for them to allow it. From school, they drove her to a local diner, not too far from home, and they told her, in as few words as possible, what had happened. They never told her exactly how it had happened, but they said she had sacrificed herself to save millions of people, perhaps even the world from a nuclear crisis. No body was ever recovered. They told her that her closest living relative had been contacted, and living arrangements would be discussed, but she would never have to worry about money again. But as young as she was, Peyton had not cared for any of that. She cared that her mother was gone, and left to her thoughts and her negative emotions. The thoughts soon became hate. She hated that her mother had taken up the mission in the first place. Someone else could have done it and died instead of her. Her hatred had formed into a rebellious streak that landed her in police custody multiple times. It took a bit of tough love from her aunt and a visit from a strange high-ranking military officer to put things in perspective and get her to calm down. And as she did, she had a bit of personal reflection herself. Her mother had always been her idol, brave and adventurous. Even before the mission that led to her death, she made real contributions to the world due to her discoveries. In the end, Peyton decided that she wanted to do the same. Fast forward 10 years later, and here she was, stranded on an alien planet. She had come upon a copse of trees on her way to Teddy, and was now traversing through. Having learned her lesson from the swamp, she had her machete drawn at the ready. But when she heard a twig snap somewhere behind her, Peyton froze. She looked over her shoulder in time to see a silhouette as tall as a man, and shaped like one, just before he vanished among the trees. Fight became flight, and without delay she took off running. She risked a backwards glance to the figure giving chase. Peyton was fast, but he was faster. Admitting that she could not outrun her pursuer, she ducked behind a tree and prepared for a surprise attack. Sure enough, she could hear him gaining on her. Timing his footsteps perfectly, she stepped out with the machete swinging, but halfway into the attack, her radio crackled and sputtered, and then she heard one word.
Peyton?
Peyton froze with her machete right at the neck of her pursuer. He was outfitted exactly as she was, and slightly taller. He was...
Teddy?
Peyton!
He exclaimed.
Oh God, it really is you.
She put the machete away and tackled him in a hug.
I thought I was being chased by some sort of human-shaped monster.
Peyton said.
And after what happened in the swamp and what happened to Melissa, I thought...
Teddy pulled away.
What happened to Melissa?
She's dead, Teddy. She was already dead when I found her, and for some reason her body had already rapidly decayed. I'm so glad you're alive!
She moved to hug him again, but he recoiled. At first she questioned it, but then she noticed he had been trying to move his arm out of the way. And then she looked closer, at the bloody stump wrapped in a makeshift bandage.
Teddy, where's your arm?
He looked down as if he was just noticing it.
Oh, right, probably being devoured by a pack of demon wolves right now.
He said.
That's why I didn't sense you on my radar.
Good thing I found you before you found it. Okay, so, what's the plan then?
plan?
You're the team leader, Peyton.
Of what team?
She laughed derisively.
You and me. The dynamic duo.
Peyton sighed extensively.
We're stuck on an alien planet and our GPS still thinks we're on Earth. I'm not entirely sure what I can do about any of this.
Well, if it's thinking we're home, why don't we try going to the location the space station should be? We landed close to it, so maybe we'll find some sort of answer as to how the hell we ended up here.
It's as good a plan as any, I suppose.
Peyton said. The location of the space station was close, and so they headed on.
But by the way, I've been thinking,
Teddy said.
what if we're not on an alien planet?
Does this look like home to you?
No, hear me out for a second, okay? We did everything by the book minus the failing controls. We set a course for Earth, we landed on Earth, except we're not on Earth. But what if we are?
You've lost me.
What if we're on Earth, but somehow not our own? I mean, even the tracker thinks this is Earth. It didn't mistake Mars for Earth.
So, parallel universe?
Exactly. Maybe what happened in that cave did something to send us here.
Peyton did not get to answer, because just then they found the space station up ahead. Where the station should have been, there was instead a ruined structure that looked like it had been made of sand, or perhaps carved from rock. Their gauntlets registered a power source somewhere within the ruins, but could not identify it. Still, they were almost there. But before they could get there, they heard a howl coming from the woods behind them.
They're on our scent. We have to move quickly.
Teddy said. As soon as the words left his mouth, the wolves burst out of the woods, numbering at least 24. The duo took off running, and Teddy occasionally turning back to fire a few rounds at them. Peyton slowed down to help, but he yelled at her.
Keep going! I'll hold them off until you get to safer ground, then you can cover me!
Peyton nodded, and poured on speed, heading for a half-wall just up ahead. She did not get far when she heard a scream. She turned. Teddy had gone down, and 2 wolves had latched onto his legs, tearing mercilessly as they dragged him towards the woods.
Teddy!
Peyton skidded to a halt and then ran back.
Peyton, no!
Teddy screamed. He tried to get more words out, but he didn't get the chance. Disregarding him, she fired into the pack, tearing through them until she got to Teddy. She grabbed his arm and tried to pull him, but he resisted.
Go! I'll only slow you down!
He said.
It's over for me.
I'm not leaving you!
More of them are coming. Peyton, go!
I said I'm not leaving!
He pushed her off and without hesitation put the barrel of his rifle against his chin.
It's been a pleasure, Captain.
Teddy, what are you—
The hum of energy was followed by a sickening squelch as his brain exploded open.
Fuck!
Peyton screamed. She shut her eyes and ran for all she was worth. The image burned in her brain. She ran through the labyrinth structure until she ended up at the center. There, she found an elevated platform, and on top of it, there was a floating red crystal atop a pillar. Ahead of it, there was a portal between 2 pillars. Overhead, she noticed wisps of smoke flying about before nosediving into the portal. On the other side, she saw a woman fighting a horde of these wisps, all while attempting to pull a crystal from a platform like the one before her. The woman looked human, and strangely familiar too. Without thinking, Peyton grabbed the red crystal and yanked for all she was worth. She found strength from her grief, and even though the crystal fought to escape her grasp, she refused to let go. Bolts of lightning exploded from the crystal like a miniature storm, striking Peyton over and over, and then her body began to disintegrate, until there was nothing but darkness. Peyton opened her eyes, feeling like she had just had the longest sleep, complete with the most disturbing dream. She looked up to find Melissa and Teddy standing over her, dressed in their gear, missing only the helmets.
Good nap?
Teddy joked.
What happened?
You passed out trying to engage the auto landing sequence, silly.
Melissa said.
We're home. Now, shall we? The press are waiting.
But what about...
What?
She shook her head.
Nothing. Just a vivid dream.
They went on ahead, leaving Peyton to find her bearings. So, that was all it had been? A lucid and terrifying dream? She started to stand, but noticed that her hand was numb. It was clenched shut. Slowly, she peeled her fingers open, and there in her palm was a red crystal. Shit! Hi sci-fi horror fans, it's Kira Rhodes. Thank you to all the amazing VAs who took part in this project, and thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to give it a thumbs up. Thank you to all of our official members of the channel. Your support means a lot to us. Craving another scary tale? Click on that video on your screen. Until next time everyone, and remember, stay cosmic.